Hello, everyone. Welcome on the Lights on Data show. Today, we're going to talk about augmentation of data governance with ChatGPT and other large language models.
I love it. It's a great topic and very relevant today. Our wonderful guest today is Anthony Woodward. Anthony Woodward is the co founder and CEO of RecordPoint, a fast growing software as a service solution focused on helping organizations discover, govern, and control their data for tighter compliance, more efficiency, and less risk. Anthony is regarded as one of the leading thinkers on the intersection of data and privacy. Welcome, Anthony. It's wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, before we go into this great topic today, I wanted to ask you if you have some interesting hobbies that you would like to share with our listeners, and if maybe you've discovered a new hobby since you moved all the way from Australia to Seattle.
Yeah, no. Look, I bought one of my hobbies with me, and I certainly discovered a hobby as well. I share a passion for coffee. I wouldn't be very Australian if I wasn't
Mm.
beating everyone over the head about how much better coffee is in Australia and how I think most Australians think we've discovered coffee, which I know is very untrue. But certainly there's a view that we perfected it. So I know I follow George on LinkedIn and see your weekly posts on coffee, and if you head over to my LinkedIn, I try to one up you on that with some different siphon coffee or some other pieces. So certainly coffee's a strong passion, and I don't know how anybody survives a day without finding
I
a
know.
good espresso.
Very nice.
So
We're in great company.
absolutely, and the good news, is really having moved to Seattle, which is the US capital of coffee. They have some work to do, I think, to catch up on Melbourne. But
Mhm.
I was able at least to transplant that particular passion and continue it in Seattle. Look, coming from Australia, I certainly surfed a lot as a child and spent a lot of time out on the waves, which is a lot harder in the Pacific Northwest. Not for the least being how cold it is in the ocean. So I'm a bit of an avid snowboarder these days. It's certainly transferred my board, border in the water and to the board in the snow. So that's certainly a piece of how I spend my weekends. But yeah, I can go on for hours about that. Yeah, those are my kind of big two hobbies.
That's lovely.
Love it. Sounds very exciting. Maybe you can go to Whistler sometime if you haven't already, and to Tofino for surfing.
Certainly been up to Whistler and planning to be up there again when the season rolls back around. So.
Wonderful. Well, we're happy to have you closer. So let's get into the topic and today's topic. So our first question, just to ease us into it, what is a large language learning model?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of hype out there about ChatGPT and Bard and a bunch of other large language models. But if I can really break it down to a level of simplicity, large language models are it's AI, or a variation of machine learning, in particular using a neural network, and we'll get to that in a little bit in a second. But they're just really mathematical models that are astonishingly good at generating text. So, that what does that mean? Well, it means that they can hold a conversation with you. They can generate an essay. They can do that in a way that is really coherent to the context of the question you're asking them. And they can do that, that is grammatically correct, particularly in English. I mean, when we start talking about other languages at this stage, they're not as good. But what what they really are at the end of the day is a mathematical model that really approximates the human brain in the sense of having interconnected neurons. So if you can think about a brain and how a brain works, where there are neurons and those are firing to connect different thoughts and processes together as a sort of conceptual model, large language models are a way to use a neural network to transform weighted mathematical models into desired output as language. And what that really comes down to is a really, really large set of mathematical models that are able to generate and transform data from the statistical numbers it has for each of the words. So all of that's kind of a lot of pieces, but to really simplify that at the end of the day, if you think about ChatGPT or Google Bard, what they've done is been fed large data sets out of the internet. They've broken that down to look at what are the patterns of language or words that go together. Then understood, all right, if I am asked a question about a particular topic, what is the kind of language I've seen on that topic, and then give it back to you in a structured, grammatically correct English way. They're not able to think. They're not able to really go beyond, the recognition of entities, so recognition of what are the things occurring around these words. And they're just able to then regurgitate these things within concept. So, the hype cycle around them being able to, turn into Skynet or something of that ilk is very far off. They are really just a very complex but large set of data in a mathematical model.
Okay, that's good news about not being there yet. That's kind of level. We have a
But
question here.
I loved the way you explained it. It was really very, in a very easy to understand way, a complex thing in a very easy to understand way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
We
you.
have a question here from Kate Strashny, and she's wondering then what problems are LLMs solving for data governance, or how can we use LLM to augment our data governance efforts?
Great question, Kate, and it's something that certainly I think still going to evolve, right? We probably don't have all the answers today, but there are some really exciting areas that this opens up. So, really considering that definition of large language models, there are some things that they're really good at. Firstly, classifying data. So if it's able to understand different strings of text, or potentially even different strings of data rather than just text, then we're able to quite accurately and reliably apply a classification or a series of different ontologies to that data. And that gets super interesting because now we can tag the data up for different aspects of governance / risk. If I can think of both sides of the coin, governance is as a result of risk that we've identified, to do things. And really that's where things get interesting, right? Because if we're able to understand those tags, we can use a statistical model that isn't pre-trained to look over a large data set that may need some governance and apply that labeling. That's sort of job one. Job two is being able to summarize that data. One of the problems I think we have in the data governance field is not just understanding, what is the data, how should we action the data, what is the risk of that data, but also how do we give it back to those that need it in forms that's consumable. So, we've traditionally had search engines and other processes to allow us to search and trawl through, find things that come up as hits, and then go through that data. The great thing about large language models is it's really great at summarizing different data points, or potentially even summarizing multiple data points within a relationship. And that's where it gets really interesting. So if you can imagine, I have data, it's classified within, an ontology of even risk, that allows us to look at, a good classic example, depending on the jurisdiction you're in, occupational health and safety, OSHA in the US, OH&S in other parts of the world. And we can start to break down, a summarization of all the risks inside the organization based on using a large language model. and then output another ontology that can apply to classification. This stuff all kind of builds on itself. So it's really good at that. It's also really good at question answering. So when you think again about the application of these tools, going and asking, can you quantify how much of a thing do I have? How much of information do I have to provide for lawyers in a legal case? Is very, very good at that. And then lastly, the last 2 points, which I think really come to the area of privacy and control. It's really good at entity recognition, but not even the sort of traditional entity recognition that we think about of people, places, organizations, companies. Those are all pretty straightforward. And although, LLMs are really good at that entity recognition. Entity recognition to things like ethnicity, health issues that might relate to a person. So really getting more granular and thinking then about the risk of that data and how we should govern it, that sit within that. And then connected to that is sentiment analysis. So being able to look at the sentiment that wraps around it. I was talking to a large customer today in the healthcare sector, and they were talking about, look, I want to find all of the doctor reports that are to do with a particular type of cancer that have had a negative outcome for the patient. And we use a large language model to break that data down and pull that through. And obviously, you've got to be very careful when you get all the doctor's reports in a particular in a particular hospital, because there's got to be a bunch of false positives. LLMs are really good at getting away from those false positives, understanding the sentiment, understanding the connectivity of those words, and then bringing that data back to be used in a meaningful way. So, very good at that kind of data mining, content categorization, and then summarizing of data.
Right. Okay. Well, we have some follow-up questions to this, and the first one comes from Dan Everett, and specifically on what you were mentioning on that the LLMs can really help with that classification. He's wondering then, let me just bring it up here. Is it doing the classification based on ontologies that you have to build, or the ontologies are being derived from the content itself?
What a great question, Dan. The beauty of LLMs is in the world of AI, there are a couple of different AI tools, or AI methods. So there's supervised and unsupervised. So supervised means that we've got a set ontology and we're training it. We're going to train it to a thing. It could be an ontology, it could be some other factor. The thing about LLMs is they are somewhere in the middle of the supervised and unsupervised, in that they're kind of semi-supervised. So you do need to give them some tokens to fine-tune the models, but it's fair. The models by themselves are pretty good at building an unsupervised set of processes. So what does that mean? It means that they are really able to generate ontologies by themselves, but they are better if you fine tune them. Like if you want to get down to the higher levels of accuracy, then you can fine tune them by training them and manipulating the models to be more effective. But they will generate an ontology without that. They do have an understanding of English in particular, and I'll keep saying that because they're not necessarily so good today at non-English, and that will evolve and get better over time. But they are very good at building English-based ontologies and being able to do that classification themselves. But you can make them better by doing the sort of what AI experts would call transfer learning, where you're able to give it more specificity to the model on the ontology you're trying to create.
Mm-hmm. And my other question was, you're mentioning that you can really figure out different entities from that data. So you mentioned ethnicity as an example. So does it mean that it's really extrapolating and figuring out the different attributes that would be based on everything else that you kind of have in there and determine, you are, this and that?
Yeah, so some really interesting academic papers around looking at even the use of language and what that indicates around your ethnicity and background. and the types of words that you use. You know, I grew up Australian, so we do use some funny um, uh, phrases and phraseology that when we write and talk about things. You know, I confuse my American friends all the time with things I say. And I think, you know, that will come through in my emails and my speech. And so the models are able to use that to then match where they've seen that, you know, because these large language models are large. They've got, you know, English language from many places. Again, they can attribute that back to a particular regional rationale or driver based on the language and the use of that language. It does go further though, where you know, you can also look at the data about you, particularly if you're feeding it with privacy data or data around the individuals that are concerned, and it can use those factoids to build a picture of your ethnicity and background also.
Wow, those are all incredible benefits as well. Yeah, but of course there's risks. I would think. I mean, that last example that you mentioned, it can definitely turn into a big risk. Are there any that come to mind that we should watch out for?
Lots. You know, we talked about the good things about large language models. In reality, there have already been some bad things. So, you know, and I think it is worth saying that you know, I started off by saying it's not Skynet, and some of the proof points that it's not Skynet are large language models are really prone to biases if not managed properly. You know, they can effectively mathematically hallucinate, you know, and lie. And really that's just because it's a reflection of the data that they represent, but they get confused. And they get confused because they see a group of things, and I say they see it because again, I'm trying to refer to them almost as if they're sentient, and they're not. But the model sees, you know, a mathematical set of concepts that are connected, those neurons again that we spoke about. But in the same way that your mind can make things up and give you, you know, experience of the concepts you haven't actually experienced, you know, the model can do the same in that it's collected a whole bunch of facts. So it creates out of those facts, or it doesn't actually create it. It sees in those facts that aren't really joined a relationship. And from that relationship, it will give you a bias, or it will give you a hallucination, or maybe even the data itself that it was fed had a bias or a hallucination in it. But when you look at it across the abstraction, you can't see it as a set of individuals, but when it's connected, it's there. So you know, that's something we really have to be very careful about. Like, how factually accurate are they? You know, how are those models going to be used, and what is the provenance behind the model, so that you know how it's constructed and what biases are going to lie inside that model.
And also, how can we maybe educate the users to, you know, in critical thinking when it comes to the results that ChatGPT brings up? And this is in general also for Google searches, right? You need to use your own critical mind to establish if those things that come up are actually trustworthy. But I think with
Absolutely.
ChatGPT, this makes it even more complex and more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you know, it's why, you know, we're always going to need experts, because,
Mm.
you know, there's still going to need to be some level of human triage of those things. Like, the models are not good at understanding their own biases, or self-reflecting, you know, being able to do that self-reflection. They're just a mathematical model. So of course they can't self-reflect. That seems self-evident, but, you know, we do. I mean, even myself, you're amazed by ChatGPT. You go ask it a question, it gives you this fantastic answer. It appears sentient, but it's really not. It's just this mathematical model that has no ability to self-reflect. So it can't think about where its biases are and correct for that unless it's told to. So again, the good thing about these models is they can be trained out of some of those behaviors, and you know, we're only at the beginning of being able to do that well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Petri here has a question for you, Anthony, and he's wondering, how do you see LLMs, especially ChatGPT, but not necessarily, can be a bridge between business and data, both in terms of being business slash data driven, but also in telling stories about data and stories with
Mhm.
data?
Yeah, I think what's really great about the large language models is you can use them as a seed to match against your own business data. So, I talked before around the different ways that we can use them from a data governance perspective, but it also can apply just as well to data sets inside the firewall, inside the business. So there are some really great scenarios of using them as a much better search engine, again, because they're much better at that summarization of information. They're much better at understanding the context of information and much better at understanding the context of your question. So you can go ahead and use them to bring that data set together. When you're asked, in a business context, of being asked to research a new product or research a new capability, being able to look at all of the data already inside your business, summarize that data, and develop that new product, for instance. They're very, very good at that. So you can already, using OpenAI, using some of the APIs from Google and others, Facebook and others, do that today. I will say, just quick, one word of caution. If you are going to go use OpenAI and ChatGPT, please go pay for it. Not that I'm recommending you pay them money, but there are really big different privacy implications if you use the free version. We probably don't have time to cover it all in the episode today. It's probably a whole other episode by itself. But just a word of warning, the privacy policy for the free version versus the paid version is very different. You're effectively sharing your data for free with OpenAI if you don't pay for it. And that can have some really big implications from a business perspective as well.
Very interesting. So, and yes, like you said, we're not going to go into it, but just to clarify, is it if you pay for it, so if you upgrade you have the pay subscription, or if you're using their API to then connect, is it either or just the API version that would respect your privacy a little bit more?
Yeah, unless it's changed. I believe in order to use their API in any meaningful way, you actually have to pay for it anyway. So they're kind of the same. There are some free elements to the API, but in order to properly use the API of business data, you would need to pay.
Right. And is that Everett is reminding us, if it's a free service, then your data is the price. Yeah,
absolutely. And look, I think, as we've already seen again with these large language models, the very large companies behind them are just chomping through our data and using it to perfect their models, and without attribution. And there's a bunch of law to be written, seeing what's happening in Italy and other parts of Europe, where there are some real caveats around what they're doing in the world, and that's yet to play out. We'll certainly see how that case law develops over time.
Mm-hmm. So Anthony, let's talk a little bit about RecordPoint too. Where does it come in? How can it help our data governance efforts?
Yeah, so look, we at RecordPoint have been doing data governance for some time. We're a SaaS solution. We work with people like New York City, Seattle City, and there in British Columbia, where you are, George, with the Liquor and Cannabis Board, for instance. What we've done for some time is classify data to apply retentioning, but to also understand its privacy context, how that data should be treated and handled over time. Where we've been doing a lot of work, and then where we've been adding to our tool, and where we've been really looking at large language models, is really improving that classification, that tagging. So what we've done that we think is rather unique is we've built about 1,000 odd connectors to upstream systems, so you can feed these models. Be that Salesforce, be that Twitter, and data lakes like Snowflake, or just traditional places like file shares. And so we've really focused, I guess, on 3 points. One is, how do you clean your data up? So the very basic things of looking at redundant, obsolete, trivial data, because we want to in order for these large language models to work, we actually need better cleansed data that has less biases and all those sorts of things. So absolutely that data cleansing capability, or we call data inventory. Two, then looking at the categorization of data, what ontologies does it apply to? So from a data governance perspective, that could well be a risk ontology. It could be a record keeping file plan ontology. It could be, looking at different dimensions of privacy. Who are the entities in this document? Who does it talk to? What are the relationships or data? I use the word document and data interchangeably here. And then providing that control so that the enterprise is able to do that in all of those systems within a large language model. So that's very much where we've been focused at RecordPoint, is really building out very simple ways for a customer to leverage these technologies, but point and click, connect to a Salesforce, classify that Salesforce, manage that Salesforce.
And Anthony, I'm very curious if as you're leveraging this technology, do you have some sort of a feedback loop that somebody is sort of verifying that classification, for example, as a first round, and you have somebody from the business and they're like, yeah, spot checking, and it's good to go.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've really felt is important, and I think our customers agree. You can operate our tool, again, it's semi-supervised. So you can operate it completely in unsupervised fashion and it will just go and do its thing. And the accuracy comes down, but there are scenarios where that makes sense. I've got a large set of data. I just want you to go and discover, right? I just want you to go classify it. It can go do those things. But we also recognize, and I think, one of the things that's that we've really focused on and done a lot of development and R&D on, is the ability to override or have a human train the model. Because it still is the case. These large language models are very good, but they still, as we said earlier, have biases and problems, and we need humans to be able to override that. One of the things we've done in our tool is really to give you that capability to go, it's not one of these, or it is one of these, in a much stronger way, and then adjust the model based on your data set. And that's a really important governance piece, right? Because you need to be able to govern the model, not just govern the data.
And what RecordPoint is doing to help one client, would it be able to benefit another as well?
Yeah, look, again, you get into some interesting legal issues. So yes, in terms of process, we learn where people are tweaking the facts in the models. We learn what are the various seeds we should provide. We don't share, in our case, every customer has a model to themselves. So their data never leaves their own tenancy within our SaaS solution. And is confined to that. So that way we're not sharing data across sort of boundaries, because even though the data is entrapped in a model, there is ways to reverse engineer that, or you may end up with outputs that are based on another business if you shared these models. So we've developed a way to create effectively a seed model that doesn't have any of the business's own data in it, but gets you started. And then on that, you'll then build with your own data over time. But it is completely separated from every other customer in our platform.
Dan is wondering about this very specific application. If you have the LLM that's we have an ontology based on GDPR, then can you use the LLMs to build policies and rules based on that ontology, classify that data based on it, and apply proper policies and rules to the classified entities?
LLMs by themselves won't do those things. They'll go close to giving you if you've given them the rules of GDPR, and then you've looked at asking it the question around how GDPR applies, they will give you answers, but they won't do those things where you take the specific policies of, say, data subject access requests in DSAR and then track the time periodicity of supplying that back to a customer. They won't do that out of the box. And I thank you very much for the tool, because it does lead back a little bit to what we do at RecordPoint. That's how we're augmenting those models, is looking at those workflows and those specific processes in GDPR or CCPA or whatever the legislative outcome is, and giving you the actions that come from that classification. So that's very much the world we live in, is how do you apply a sort of regulatory actions to an AI outcome?
So I mean, I understand all these benefits, and it's fantastic, and it really makes my heart jump in a positive way. It's just looking at all the possibilities and how the world is advancing in this area is purely fantastic. Do you think, I mean, it's definitely removing a lot of the hassle from organizations on how to deal with some of these data governance aspects. Do you feel it will still be able to, or it should still involve stakeholders from across the business in their data governance efforts? Now with ChatGPT and LLMs and RecordPoint really helping a lot of the groundwork.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to bring the the business owners and the stakeholders along in this journey. The thing about AI is it is a big leap. Like, it is really accelerating our ability to do things at a really great pace that previously took a lot longer and was much more difficult to do. But you can't just go take that leap in the corner, because if you take the leap in the corner, you've kind of jumped a dimension, if you will, but nobody else came with you. And so I think there's so many benefits here for the business and how we're organizing data and thinking about making data more effective, that you'd want to share it. You'd want to bring your stakeholders along. You'd want to integrate them into that. And I think what's really great about what's happened in the public discourse around OpenAI and ChatGPT and the rest of it is there's a real awareness of wanting to have that conversation and seeing this as a real mechanism to make their lives and their jobs easier. What we've really always focused on at RecordPoint is how do we abstract as much of the data governance and risk decisions from the user so it doesn't burden them. The really great things about LLMs is we've really taken that leap forward. And I think that's the starting point of that conversation of, I'm not here to come and add something more to your day. I'm actually here to come and take something away from your day and make it more effective and better for you. And that's really, when you have that conversation, it's really productive.
Right. Yeah, and it frees up the mind of the stakeholders so they can focus on the strategic decisions, which is awesome. So that's great to bring them in, because now they have more capacity to focus on that. I wanted to ask Anthony, how do you see that this evolution will help data governance? So where does this all go towards? You mentioned acceleration just now. So where are we heading?
Yeah, it's the $1,000,000 question. Look, we really are at a very early stage for what we've seen from ChatGPT and the really large language models that are out there. There is, whilst they are going to revolutionize the processes we have, I think in data governance, they're actually a really easy application. Like, we're one of the first areas that will be able to take advantage of them very quickly. But there is a plethora of additional workloads and capabilities that we're going to be able to use them for, right? Because they're really good at understanding context, and summarization and capturing, different decisions is a strong word, but supporting evidence to decisions. Really going to see them more and more pop up into different business processes that we all have. So, being able to augment a workflow, onboarding a patient to a hospital, but bringing that data set, summarizing the kind of problems they've had in the past. So really bringing facts and making them bubble to the top in a timely manner of that context. And that's a very simple example, but that really applies to everything. So, we will really see them roll out in systems everywhere. I think in 10, 15 years time, every technology will have some AI LLM component to it. I certainly see LLMs, and what's happened with AI here is just as revolutionary as the internet, if not more revolutionary than the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, the future is very exciting. Lastly, I want to take this question from Ravid. He's wondering, what do you use most, ChatGPT or Bard?
Good question. I'm really oscillating between the two. They both have some strengths and weaknesses, as you probably have experienced. Look, if I was to take today as an example, I use Bard a little bit more today. I found Bard just a touch better at. Today I was working on a new business plan and some board reports. And I was looking for some data to bring into that. Bard's a little better at bringing in statistical information and those sorts of things. So I've leaned in that direction. But these models are evolving so quickly. OpenAI put out GPT-4. There are others coming in the pipeline that we'll see come out. And so you ask me that same question again tomorrow, and I'll probably give you a different answer. But it's a great question.
Thank you, Anthony. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and putting the lights on augmentation of data governance with ChatGPT.
But thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Anthony, where can people find you and also find more about RecordPoint?
Usually on a plane over the Pacific somewhere, but no. So look, I'm Anthony Woodward on LinkedIn and many other places. You can find me in any social network. I'm relatively active, but if you hit recordpoint.com, we have a whole bunch more description on our website. We have a number of blog articles on large language models and ChatGPT and how we're using AI and those processes. And certainly from there, if you hit one of the contact us or some of those processes there, you'll be able to talk to myself or one of the team. And always happy to have a reach out on Twitter. So I'm at Woodward, so WOODWA on Twitter. Or hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to have a chat with anybody that's interested in this topic.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining in on this exciting topic, and looking forward to see you next week.
And thank you very much for the questions, everyone. Really, really good questions and very good engagement. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.